Okay, so today we're going to talk about exercise 116, and I'm going to go through a bunch of examples dealing with how do you work with swatches and how do you work in both Photoshop and Illustrator. So today's one of those days where we go back in time, work a little bit in Photoshop, then we come into Illustrator and we work through that. A lot of today is also about getting ready for your assignment 204, which is your Charlie Harper. And so I want to give you time to work on that in class and have any kind of extra help that you need relating to that. But before we do that, we're going to talk about color theory in depth. As I mentioned before, Daniel's here, Professor Abbott, I guess I should say, to do a course evaluation of me, which means the schedule is going to be a little bit different than normal. I'm going to lecture, and then after I'm done lecturing, he has some forms to pass out that you guys have to fill out. It's one of the things that happens every 3 semesters? Something like that? 3 or 4 semesters. So you may have done this before with another faculty person. It's to make sure that we're actually doing a good job. So please be honest when you give that feedback, because it does help me become a better instructor. So I appreciate it. So let's start talking about color theory, and then we'll get into some Charlie Harper examples. And I think one of the funny things about color theory is when we get started and we first start talking about colors and color theory and stuff, we go way back in time. And I think it's particularly relevant because I have a 5.5-year-old at home, and she loves to mix paints and do that sort of thing. And that's essentially what we're talking about in the most basic stages of color theory. And that is that we start with a color wheel, and that color wheel has our primary colors, which are our red here, our yellow there, and our blue there. And so they're arranged in kind of that 3-prong triangle, so to speak. And in between each of those is a secondary color. And so the secondary color, this is like as if we were mixing paints together. If we took red paint and we took blue paint, we mixed them together, we would get purple, right? So purple's right here, or violet, I guess, in the sense of this. But that is a secondary color denoted by the S. Orange is also a secondary color, as is green. And so that's the color that's in between each of the primary colors. So it's just a straight mixing of those colors. If we take it a step further and we go to what would be a tertiary color, it's mixing a primary color with a secondary color. And so as we mix those two together, we get something like a red-orange or a yellow-orange, or a color with a fancier name, but you guys get the idea of it. Okay? So those are those kind of middle between a secondary and a tertiary, or excuse me, a secondary and a primary give us that tertiary color. Complementary colors are colors that complement each other, and they're generally 180 degrees opposite on the color wheel. So if we look at this, for example, and we look at yellow as our primary color, right? The direct opposite of that, straight down, would be its complement. And in this case, it would be purple as its complement. If we took red, for example, as our primary, and we went directly across, we'd end up with green as its complement. So that direct opposite works nicely as a contrasting sort of color. And it may or may not be desirable to have those two colors together, but that is its kind of most appropriate complement. And a lot of times what we'll do in the world of graphic design is, instead of using just a straight complement and a straight color scheme of a primary and a complement, we might do a split complement. So in the case of, say, yellow, instead of going straight across and having one complement, we do a split and we go to either side. And we get a darker blue and kind of a purple color. And those two would work together. So we don't have a direct complement, but we split the complement. And you'll see this when we get into the lab portion today. A lot of times that split complement is a nice way of working a color scheme out. Analogous colors are colors that are close together on a color wheel. So if we look at this particular group, obviously the piece that is highlighted here, the big pie piece there, any color that is in one of these rows is similar to its neighbor. And so if we had a color scheme that was designed with analogous colors or like colors, there wouldn't be a big highlight or a big contrast. They would all kind of blend together. And so if our intended design purpose was, for example, to highlight various conditions in a particular floor plan. I know this is one of the things that Anthony likes to do in 220 is he likes to have his little color-coded highlights, right? For those of you that are in that or approaching that class. It might be, instead of using every color of the rainbow, it might be nice to use analogous colors or colors that go together that are still distinguishable but are not completely different. So when you have lots of different colors, if you use every color of the rainbow going around, it kind of ends up looking like a big colored muddled mess. And if we use similar colors and they all kind of work together, we could still distinguish between the functions of the rooms in that diagram, for example. But at the same time, right, we can have something that kind of looks like it belongs together instead of a bunch of splashing colors that are popping out at us. So there can be appropriate times for these kinds of analogous colors, colors that are together. So we have to stop and we have to talk a little bit about color systems. And you've probably seen this already when we've opened up InDesign or if we opened up Illustrator. And as we open it up, a lot of times it'll ask us, what color mode do you want to be working in? And there's usually two choices. There's usually RGB mode and there's usually CMYK mode. And so I want to talk about what each of those mean and why it matters whether you pick one or the other. So we'll start with RGB, red, green, and blue. And this is about how light makes colors. And it's really hard because I don't have a great live example for how this works. Anybody been to the Exploratorium in San Francisco before? They had a great exhibit. I don't know whether it's still there or not. This is a couple years ago, where they had several different colors of lights that were projecting onto a screen. And if you stood in front of those colors, right, recognize that those lights were coming in from different locations. If you stood in front of those colors, you would cast a shadow, much like I'm casting a shadow here. The difference is you'd only be blocking one or two of the lights. And so as you did that, your shadow would be a particular color because this is an additive color system. When we add red, green, and blue light together, we get white light. If we add just red and green light together, we get yellow light. And so this is one of those things that it's kind of hard to explain unless you experience it in that kind of a context where you can see the light actually adding together. But this is how our monitors, our phones, our iPads, all of those items, that's how they work, right? They have a backlight, they turn on certain colors of pixels, and we get any color that we want based on a combination of those pixels. So that is for media that's going to be presented on a screen. So if we were going to design, say, a photograph and it was going to be projected on a screen, we'd want to be working in RGB mode, red, green, and blue mode. If, however, we were designing something, say, like the lecture series poster that you guys all just turned in, we would want to be designing in CMYK mode, which has to do with pigments of ink. And so the easiest way to think of this is I have a color laser printer. I put 4 different inks into that color laser printer. If you have an inkjet printer, it's much the same way. Maybe you have a couple other colors because it helps in the realism of an inkjet to have a few other colors. But in the nature of a color laser printer, we have a cyan cartridge, we have a magenta cartridge, we have a yellow cartridge, and we have what's called key, which is black. Okay, so we have those 4 cartridges. And as we put those cartridges together and we print onto a page, the laser printer drops the toner onto the page, heats it up, fuses it together, and we have the page. That page then, if we were to take it out in the sunlight, does the opposite of the additive system that we just talked about, in that those various colors absorb all the light except for the color that they are. So the reflected light in this context is what we're seeing. So if we had, for example, we wanted navy blue, it would be a combination of the cyan toner and the magenta toner, and it would be absorbing all of the light hitting the page except for that navy blue color. And that would be what's reflected back, and that's then what we see. So it's very different in terms of how we assemble the colors. The end output of whatever the color would be is essentially the same, but our intended use of our document matters, whether we pick CMYK or RGB. So if we were, say, in InDesign, generally most everything that we create in InDesign is for print purposes. So generally speaking, we're going to be working in CMYK. If we were working in Photoshop or something like that, maybe Illustrator's kind of half and half. But if we were working, say, in Photoshop, chances are that's something that's going to be displayed on a screen. You're going to look at it on your phone. You enhance the picture. You want to show it to your grandma. You pull it up on your iPad. RGB mode is the correct mode to be in. You can convert between one mode and the other, but a lot of times the colors get off ever so slightly. And so this is another problem with color theory in that we don't have calibrated monitors here at school. If we really wanted to be precise about this, or we were professional photographers or professional graphic designers, we would buy a little apparatus that sticks on the corner of your monitor that actually reads what the color is on the screen, adjusts the monitor so that what we see can then be matched to a printer profile that when you print, it comes out and looks exactly the same. So I'm guessing that most of you have printed something here before and had it not look like what you thought it was going to look like, correct? So that is a problem in the color profiling, the calibration of the monitor against the calibration of the printer, and the two aren't agreeing. And that's something that's kind of a known thing. But as you move forward in graphic design, if you start working with your own laptop, you may invest in something like this to make sure that you have accurate representation of color across profiles. So it's a little beyond the scope of the class, but I like to at least point out that this exists and is something to consider as you go forward. So color theory is essentially that instead of just picking colors in a vacuum, we want to think about why we want to choose a particular color and what meaning or emotion or association we might have with that particular color, and then be deliberate about, yes, I do want to pick red, and there's a reason I want to pick red. Or yes, I do want to pick blue, and there's a reason why I want to pick blue. So it should be something that's intentional. And I'll show you a bunch of examples today and hopefully highlight how this very subtly can affect us. So this is from the Color Design Workbook. You guys have, or maybe you have, the Layout Workbook by Kristen Cullen. This is another book from Rockport. It's not something that I required as part of this class or recommended as part of this class, but this is the book on color theory and how it works. A lot of the stuff that I talk about comes from this book. If it's something that you're really interested in or want to explore further, obviously there's a lot of content in this book for you to go through, and it shows you that my 30, 40, 50 minutes of talking about color theory is in no way comprehensive. There's a lot more that you can learn relating to color theory. But color theory is at its core about developing aesthetically pleasing color relationships. And this shouldn't be a big surprise. Obviously, we're graphic designers, we're designers, we want our colors to be chosen deliberately and to make what we create aesthetically nice. And so we want to make sure that that's happening. So color generally evokes some kind of an emotion or has some kind of an association with it. And I'll talk about the major colors in a little bit, and we'll go through what those emotions might be and how they kind of play together and play off each other. But generally there is also some color groups that help to kind of globally categorize certain collections of colors. And we're generally talking about the warm colors, the cool colors, and the neutral colors. And so if we stay within one of those families of colors, generally we can have a certain general feel. And so let's take the warm colors, for example. The warm colors are the yellows, the oranges, the reds, those kinds of colors. And they're generally associated with feelings of happiness or joy or exuberance, those kinds of things. And somehow, when we think warm colors, it's an association with fire. And so you have individual experiences, right? Generally, fires and could be negative, but generally speaking, you think of campfires or you think of camp out last summer or something along those lines, and they're generally positive, happy sorts of things. Now, certainly your house could have burned down and it could have been a very negative association, so it's possible that you as the designer have to be aware that something like this might be negative for somebody where it might be positive for a lot of other people. And you want to be aware that that can happen. And we'll talk about that. There's always a flip side to these. So in 2009, for example, there was a big burst in the kind of the online ecosystem. Online shopping, all that stuff was kind of doing a major dip. Bubble burst. Struggling websites shifted their color schemes to include yellow to ease customer tension, to make people a little bit happier. Right? So these kinds of things happen very subtly and can transform how we perceive a particular environment. So I'll today show a lot of web examples. We'll go through several major companies and how their websites have evolved over time, going back to, say, 1996 and through today. And by doing that, I think it's a particularly good way of seeing how colors kind of weave their way in and out of what we see every day. It's easier to go about websites and to see static examples than, say, to go through clothing and how clothing trends change and colors change and that sort of thing. Websites are just something that we as designers can appreciate really easily, and they're a good easy example. Cool colors are the blues, the greens, and the purples, more associated with nature, right? They're generally cold, winter morning, that's why they're called cool colors. Often used for professional establishment sorts of websites or designs, authority, that sort of thing. Right? So it's generally, there's a reason people wear blue suits, that kind of thing. Neutral colors, the grays, the blacks, the browns, the whites, those really aren't going warm, and they're not really going cold. Now, of course, you could put up an argument saying, well, wait a minute, there's a set of warm grays and there's a set of cool grays. Depending on how much yellow or how much blue is in the gray, it's going to change the gray. But if we just kind of back away from that and say, yes, that's a fine detail, but generally speaking, these are nowhere near the reds or the blues. Right? It's a much more neutral color, and it can be used as such, which can certainly be an advantage. And we'll talk about those more as we go along. So red is often symbolic of fire or power. It could be anger. It could be resolve. Right? Things that are very passionate tend to be red. Right? Way back in time, you guys probably in grade school had to read the Scarlet Letter. Right? Scarlet, red, there's an association there. And so we can use this to our advantage. We can stimulate energy, excitement, those kinds of things by using red as a color choice. There's not a lot of websites that use a predominant amount of red. One of the few examples would be YouTube. YouTube has a lot of red on it, and so my guess is that whoever designed it was trying to stimulate this energy and this, hey, this is a different experience. If you go back to YouTube before online videos were really there, you want to draw people to that new exciting thing, so maybe red wasn't a bad choice. And now that it's more establishment, could they probably change their color scheme? Yeah, they probably could, but they're also kind of well down the road with that. Negative connotations, we already talked about anger, emergency, rage, those kinds of things. So just because it's an exciting power, it gets people excited, those kinds of connotations doesn't mean that it couldn't be perceived as an angry or an aggressive color. And so that could be the negative side of it. And you want to be aware of what of that negative side comes out for certain people. Orange, right, is a shade different than red, but at the same time it kind of has the same warm characteristics, but it's also associated with a general happiness, sunshine, joy sort of thing. Yellow is also in that category. So we're in the warm colors. I love this line that evokes childlike exuberance, right? So there is a reason that I chose orange as the Digital Tools for Architects website, right, as that highlight color. Hopefully it has something like you're excited to be here. Right? That's the desired connotation that I'm putting out to you by choosing the color orange. So it's not just something that I randomly picked out and said, oh, I think I want the Digital Tools site to be blue, or I want it to be purple. Right? I deliberately picked orange because I think it's an appropriate thing for what we're trying to do and the excitement level that should go with it. Negative connotations, orange can still be a little bit on the aggressive side. So you want to be aware of that. It could be ignorance and deceit. I haven't seen this so much, but the Bible of color theory says that, so we're going to include it there as well. Or excuse me, yellow. I can't even see my colors. Yellow is generally a happy or a positive color. As I said in 2009, when things were looking kind of glum, a lot of websites switched to include yellow because it tends to be a happy color. If you were to get out a set of crayons or get out a set of markers and you were told to draw the sun, chances are you'd pick up a yellow crayon. Right? Sure, sunlight has a lot of yellow in it, but it's not just yellow. It's somehow deeply rooted that this is a sunshine, energy, optimism, brightness color. And so we can use it as such, and we can use it as a highlight color. We also use it for things like caution tape. We've got the caution tape there where the air conditioners are about to fall through the roof, right? Don't walk under here. So we put yellow tape up there, don't walk there. And so we recognize that. For some reason, they painted the bright yellow paint around each of the drains, and I'm not exactly sure why they did that, but it certainly draws your attention to that drain, and it exists. Maybe it's so that the people wearing high heels don't get stuck. I don't know. But the point is that it's there, and it's drawing your attention to it. And so that's something that we associate with that, hey, guess what? Caution, look at this. Green is generally always symbolic of nature. And so it's no surprise that green has a direct association. We have green leaves, we have green plants, we have all of that sort of thing. It can also be symbolic of money. And that's because the US dollar is green. If we were in a different country where green wasn't the primary color in currency, it may not be. So if you were, say, designing something for an international audience, maybe a website that was an e-commerce site or something like that, maybe picking green isn't the right choice. Even though you think it's symbolic of money, if you go internationally, it might not be. So you want to be aware of where your target audience is and what the colors are for that target audience as well. It can show greed and or jealousy, and it can be used for a beginner or somebody that's new in something. You know, if you're green at something, you've never tried it before. I think the other thing that's very interesting about the color green is we've kind of taken green from the color into nature, and this idea of green, into something about being socially or environmentally responsible. Right? We drive a Prius, therefore we're green. Right? It's kind of an interesting transition of this color all the way through to now being green means something. And so that green is essentially a color. And so what does that translate to in the world of design in terms of how do we represent something that is green? Does it actually have to be green anymore? Maybe not. And so it's just an interesting point to pull up. Blue is generally the peaceful, calming color. It's stability, expertise. It's no surprise that a lot of the major big companies have blue. And I'll show you a graphic of a bunch of company logos, and you'll see that a lot of the big ticket companies have blue in their logos. I actually, I don't know if any of you watch March Madness, the basketball tournament that's going on right now. It's funny, but there's a statistic that says of all the winners of the national title in college basketball, most of them have blue in their jerseys. Go figure. Right? So it's somehow this weird color that is an establishment type color. Symbolizes trust and dependability. It's also potentially about depression or coldness or hands off. I'm kind of passive and I'm not actively doing this. So let's look at an example. So this is the whitehouse.gov page. And I'm going to show you a few political examples today. This is not geared toward sparring and getting a big political debate. This is about colors, not about politics. That's for your politics or history class or whatever. This is just about using these as current examples. So the White House website here, big blue bar, establishment, right? No surprise that they're using blue. What if, however, we switched and we looked at the same website and it was red? It feels a little different, doesn't it? So this is not the actual website. I did a Photoshop change of this. I shifted the hue on it so that we could see it as if it were red. And obviously there's a few masks so that it looks relatively the same. But this has a different feeling about it. And it might not be something that you can put your finger on right away, but at the same time it does have a different feeling. It's not this establishment cool, hey, this is the way life is. It's a little bit more aggressive, I guess might be the term. And you could probably come up with a better term than that on the fly, but it's a little bit different. And so you want to think about which is the right one for the message you're trying to portray. So purple is generally the color of royalty and or sophistication. And this goes way back to when we had to use dyes for clothes and dyes were expensive. Purple dye was one of the most expensive. Therefore, if you could afford purple dye, you were wealthy. And so that association stuck. And so we still have this sort of association with the color purple. Anybody know the major website out there that uses the color purple? Nobody in my... Okay, I guarantee you've all been to this website. Okay, that's a good one. That's a good one. There's a different one. Yahoo. Kind of weird. And we'll talk about Yahoo in a second as to why they chose purple. So it shows wealth, luxury, obviously an association. Gives a sense of spirituality and or religion. A lot of religious activities have the color purple associated with them. Healing, feminine qualities. It can kind of be gloomy or sad, much like the blue color can. Black is generally correlated with power, elegance, or sophistication, right? Maybe depth. The opposite of that would be death. There's a reason people that are mourning wear black, right? So it has definitely a strong negative. It's the color of grief, mourning, or sorrow. So you guys have all had architectural reviews before where you had visiting architects come in. What color do all architects wear? Black. Kind of weird, right? But guaranteed you walk into your review and most of the architects that walk into the room are black. So they're making a statement by choosing to wear black. And it's kind of this unsaid thing, but it often has to do with this sophistication or power thing.
right? Where we are architects, we're designers, we know what to do, therefore we wear black. If you, as a reviewee or somebody who's going to be reviewed, right, come in and wear black, you're making a particular statement. If you come in and wear bright red, you're making a particular statement. So what I'm saying by bringing that up is that you want to think about what it is that you're wearing and why you're wearing it. Right? I'm neutral today. I'm wearing gray. Right? I deliberately didn't wear black because I knew I was going to talk about this. So you want to think about that in relation. So if you look around at your neighbors, some of you are wearing red. What does that say about you? Some of you are wearing blue. What does that say about you? And you maybe just like the color. But certainly in a review context, it might be relevant to choose very carefully with what you're going to pick. White, on the other hand, is generally purity, innocence. There's a reason that women wear white wedding dresses, right? It's a long-standing tradition of purity. And so in the same context, white can be used for that. Right? And we can definitely incorporate it into our designs as part of it. Now, we're at a slight advantage because no matter what we draw or no matter what we do is always going to have a certain amount of black and a certain amount of white in it. We generally print on white paper, and generally the ink is black. So there's always going to be a fair amount of that in it. It can also be kind of a cold or a distant color. It might be associated with winter or snow or something along those lines, which may or may not be a good thing. So how about this? Research reveals that all human beings make an unconscious judgment about a person, an environment, or an item. That basically means everything, right? Within 90 seconds of the initial viewing, so within 90 seconds, you have a judgment about something, and that between 62 and 90% of that initial judgment is based on color alone. It's kind of scary. But at the same time, it tells you how absolutely critical what color you choose for something to be is. Because that's going to come into this initial impression, that initial 90-second impression. Okay, so this was a study done by the Institute for Color Research. So I told you I'd show you this graphic, which I think is really fun because it shows us all of these logos. And it's kind of relevant for the logo lecture that we did before spring break, if you can remember back that far. But it shows us a bunch of examples of kind of companies and how they've chosen to be in certain logo realms. So if we look first at, say, the green set of logos, right? Whole Foods, John Deere, right? Agriculture-based type companies, green makes a lot of sense, right? Even Starbucks is in that realm. I think it's very interesting that BP, a petroleum energy company, would be in the green realm, right? But they've deliberately chosen to be in that realm. If we look at the second example here under trust, that blue section, guess what? AT&T, GE, right? Big corporate companies are all in that blue category, right? And so they're going to be in that category because they're trying to exude that kind of stability. Facebook, right? Walmart, those are all big name companies, stable blue. The creative side, or the purple side, right, has a lot of things like Yahoo, but it also has a few other examples. eHarmony was a good one that you guys came up with, right? Hallmark, greeting cards, right? Kind of in that purple. Maybe that's associated with wealth. You can afford to give somebody a card. I don't know. As we move up into the red category, right, there are actually a large number of red logos, and websites that are associated with these logos tend to have some red accents on them. Big name ones would be Coca-Cola, right? Obviously Target was a pretty good one. And so a variety of others, you can see those. Orange is kind of an odd conglomeration of kind of cheerful, happy logos. We get up into the yellow, right? A lot of big ticket ones. Best Buy, right, is a big item, lots of yellow, Nikon, etc. And way up here out at the very end, we have the ones that want to include everybody. So the NBCs, the Microsofts, we cover everybody. And so we have all colors. eBay as well. So let's take a look at some case studies and see how colors have changed over time and how certain websites have used it. We talked about Yahoo as being a good example. And I'm going to pick it because they ultimately use purple, and I think that's interesting. But let's go way back in time to 1996. Some of you probably weren't born in 1996 or were just born. That's scary because that means I'm old. But this is 1996. This is what Yahoo looked like in 1996. Far cry from what any website looks like today. But if we look at this site, up at the top we have the Yahoo logo in red. So if we think back to the early stages of the web and those kind of beginning internet things, hey, this is an exciting thing. Look at Yahoo. Look at all this stuff we have. It's no surprise they wanted that initial logo to be red. Okay? Obviously, the links and everything are blue. I don't think that has anything to do with the actual color blue. It had to do with when they created the web in the first place, all the links were colored blue. So I don't think it was necessarily a conscious decision. I think it was just something that was kind of the time. So let's jump forward into the year 2000. It's kind of scary to me that we've only come this far by the year 2000, but I guess it is 2016, and this is 16 years ago. Okay? So in the year 2000, it was a really novel idea that I could buy something online. I could actually pay for something and have it shipped to me. Right? This was back in the era of you wanted to buy something that now would be available online. You had to like watch QVC channel and like call the phone number and call something. Right? So the idea that you could, thousands of stores, notice thousands of stores, only thousands of stores. Right? So this is very young, millions of products, but it's green. It has to do with money, it has to do with shopping, and so they've invested an awful lot on this page to have green. Right? If we look up here at the top bar right there, notice behind the Yahoo logo, it's green. The middle bar here is green. This whole section here is green. And obviously the links are still blue because that was in the era where links were only blue. But look at how much emphasis they put on green and shopping. So it's a subliminal message. It's not something that's outright, right? Although it does, of course, say Yahoo Shopping on it. But it's just something that kind of makes an association of this has to do with e-commerce. So let's jump forward. 2003, 3 years forward, we have our first introduction of purple on the Yahoo website. Just a little bit over here, and it's a very light purple. We also have our first real kind of influx of bright colors. We have online Yahoo games. We can play games. Right? This is a new thing. Yahoo logo is still red, right? And we have a lot of links, but we have a little bit more color, and it's kind of evolving a little bit. So not too much different, but we're evolving. So let's jump forward again into 2005, tied to a specific time of year. This was a February. We have, again, major emphasis on shopping. We've got pink associated with Valentine's Day, and we're getting little example products that are related to Valentine's Day. Again, still only 2005. Online shopping is a rather new thing. We don't all have Amazon Prime and have stuff shipped to our house every 2 days. But we're starting to get a little bit more of that. A little bit more purple. Bolder purple, still kind of trickling into the side. Let's go forward into 2007. Yahoo, as its struggling company, by the way, I think Microsoft's trying to buy Yahoo right now again. So Yahoo has been a struggling company. So there's a lot of these kinds of things that happen. 2007, Yahoo said, wait a minute, Google's really popular, and people seem to like Google a lot. Maybe we should look like Google. So they simplified their page down, and we lost a lot of stuff off the page. Well, guess what? A couple years later, they said, no, we didn't really want to do that. We want to go back. But now we switch from the old Yahoo logo in red to the new Yahoo logo that's in purple. So they're trying to rebrand themselves at this point into, we're the luxury brand. We're the company that you want to have your email account with. We're the company that you want to associate with search. Right? So we're a higher end. And so they're trying to portray that by just changing their colors. And so we have a little bit of purple. It's still a fairly light purple. But notice even the images that they're choosing to put on the home page have a lot of purple in them. We move forward to 2013. Purple color gets a little bit darker. Still very purple. A little bit simpler. Basically primarily blues and purples. And that's it. Okay, so we're again trying to establish that luxury plan, that standing. Big purple bars, big purple bar across the top. Let's go forward to today, 2016. Notice the purple has shifted even more toward the dark side. So it's just that much closer to black. So they're trying to take that purple, but they're kind of deciding it should be a little bit more sophisticated, a little bit more black, a little bit more power-oriented, and all of that gets a little bit darker. So I couldn't resist. I had to show you another case study, and I had to pick Apple. Because I think, again, very good example of a company who's evolved a lot and whose design decisions have had large rippling consequences. So if we look at Apple, this is Apple in 1997. And so again, some of you were probably just barely born. But in 1997, Apple was about to die. It It was within days of dying or months of dying. And Steve Jobs came back in after having left the company and said, we're going to resurrect this company, we're going to change it. So we go from 1997, this is their website, red, excitement, whatever that they're trying to portray. Now notice this is very different than the Yahoo example. So yes, they were still trying to be graphic. This was an idealized graphic website in 1997. To this in 1998. So Steve Jobs comes back. We're going to rebrand the whole Apple. Very clean, just black Apple logo. We introduce a little bit of color, but it's very establishment. It's very black and white. And so they're trying to reinvent themselves by changing their color scheme. Let's go forward a little bit into the year 2000. This looks shockingly similar to what Apple's website today looks like. It really hasn't evolved that much, other than the colors, the gloss, and the shininess have changed a fair amount. So we have a little bit of red in the Apple logo. So Apple's still trying to say, hey, we're a new exciting company. Here's my little bit of red. But notice also that Steve Jobs came back, redesigned the computers, tried to get it to be a consumer product, something that you would want to buy because it was pretty. Right, now maybe in today's definition this doesn't classify as pretty, but if we go back in time and we think about what it was like in the year 2000, that was a pretty hot machine. And it looked pretty cool for that era. But this particular iMac machine came in a variety of colors. I think it was like tangerine and some kind of lime green and whatever. There was a few different colors. But the picture, turquoise, thank you. You're dating yourself, be careful. But the picture that they chose to put on the home page was purple. So another example of purple and the idea that this particular product is a wealth or a luxury item and you want to have it as a status symbol. So intentional, even though there were other examples of this particular product, this was an intentional choice for why we're going to put the purple one on the home page. Take a look at that video camera. That was pretty sexy. Okay, so let's fast forward to 2001. Star Wars Episode 2 comes out. Right? It's down there in the bottom. I think these kind of things are kind of funny. We switched from the purple. We're into blue. That red Apple turned blue. We're trying to be a little bit more establishment. Hey, we're back as Apple. I don't know why it's we. I guess I'm talking on behalf of Apple at this point. I have no association with Apple. But we're back. We're now an established brand. You can have confidence in us. We're going to shift our color scheme in the blue direction. OS X comes out, blue color scheme. Right, big on the shiny thing. I had to throw up this particular image because it has Adobe Illustrator 10 in it. And we're all in the world of CS6 or CC, which is probably version 20 or 21 or 22. So this is a ways back in time. Let's go forward, 2002. That's what a laptop looked like in 2002. Actually, that's a pretty sexy laptop for 2002. Notice, top bar, color goes away. It's all gray now. Right, we're going into that gray color scheme. But again, a lot of blue on the page. Blue for the laptop screen, blue backdrop. Again, stable company. 2004, iPods come out. Right, this is a new innovative product. But at the same time, there were other MP3 players out. Right? You could have a Sony mini disc player or whatever at the time. You guys were like, what on earth was that? Go look it up. It existed. Right? I think there was another one called a Rio or something. Right? But Apple came out with the iPod, and that was a big deal, and it was a luxury item. So when they do these commercials, and some of you might remember back to these commercials, these U2 commercials and stuff like that, relating to the iPod, right? Big purple backdrop, big color, luxury item. So again, we're seeing that resurgence of purple just as an advertising piece. Then we move forward, 2006. This is about the era when Apple switched from having their own PowerPC processors into the world of Intel processors, which meant that Apple had to distinguish themselves from the Dells and the HPs, and so they were trying to push the, hey, we're a stable brand, look at our nice black and white and gray stability website, but our stuff is really elegant and pretty. And so we're going to try to emphasize that elegant and pretty now, in contrast to what you would get for one of those other machines. We move forward into 2007. The bar becomes gray, but it has a little bit of shine, a little bit of gradient to it. And so we're moving forward. We've got the iMacs, lots of colors going on in the iMacs, but not too much directly associated with it. Right? How about this? 2010, this is what an iPhone looked like. It looks so old, doesn't it? It's funny how these things start to be dated. It's just like when you watch a TV show and you see somebody pick up a really old phone and you're like, oh my God, he picked up a flip phone. Right? It's that kind of stuff. So again, top bar, gray, a little bit of shine to it, emphasis on the products. Let's go forward. A little bit darker gray, we see a switch from the black lettering to the white lettering. Right? A little bit thicker font. Obviously, this is much more about typography, a lot of white in the page, but still a fair amount of blue as that backdrop, all right, if we look at the page. 2013, iPhone 5, a little bit darker gray band, looks very consistent. So you're starting to see a lot of consistency. They're not changing too much anymore. Okay, big date, September 18th, 2013. You guys are like, wait a minute, why is that a big date? It's actually a great big date in the world of graphic design. That is when iOS 7 came out, which was Apple's operating system for phones and iPads and that sort of thing. And what Johnny Ives, the lead designer, did at Apple is he said, we're going away from things with shadows, graphic elements with shadows, shine, gradients, and we're going into what's called a flat UI. Things are going to be very simple, very basic, just colors, boxes, and that has really driven design since 2013. So now, it started with Apple, and now almost every company has followed suit. I'm working with Daniel right now to go through and kind of redesign the DVC architecture webpage, and we're dealing a lot with this sort of thing. Right? The trend right now, if you go to Berkeley's webpage, if you go to Cal Poly's webpage, you go to UCLA's webpage, it's all this flat UI. And so that is what the trend is. And so you have to be aware of that as you go forward. So we go forward. This looks very much like a Today website. But again, Apple's a little bit earlier in the design process, so we're going to see it a little bit earlier than we're going to see it everywhere else. But it's very much about these. I'm surprised that the bar at the top still has the gradient and a little bit of shine on it. I would have thought that that would have gone away. Let's fast forward a year into 2015, no shine, completely flat up at the top. So we've been consistent with gray with white letters all the way along, but now we're completely flat, nothing shiny, no shadows anywhere on the page. So you can really see how this design trend goes through. We look here at today, 2016. The gray has gotten darker, a little bit more black, but it's essentially the same look. Okay, so we're going to go into some further analysis. And I told you I was going to show you some political websites. And given today's climate in the world of politics, I think somehow this is current and relevant to look at. So remember, before we get into those websites, that research is showing you that color is a driving factor in what you perceive about somebody. Okay, so let's go forward. And again, no comments about whether these candidates are the right candidates or the wrong candidates or what their platforms are, just an analysis of what we see from their websites. Okay, so this is Bernie's website, Bernie Sanders' website. Recognize, of course, that these people are all running for president of the United States. So there is an inherent color scheme that is associated with being president. That would be red, white, and blue. So we have to start with the basis of that understanding, but there are certainly connotations of that. So let's take Bernie's website and jump forward and do an analysis of what the general color groups would be on this website. And I'll flip back and forth. Okay? So we have a predominant amount here. Almost 50% of the website is in the black realm. So I would consider blacks and whites to be neutral colors. Therefore, they're not telling us too much about what's going on. And as we come down in the analysis, we get a fair amount of blue. 12% of blue, and then we come down here with another 4%. So maybe we'll talk, say, 18% in the summary of blue, and then a little bit of green. So really, his website is about blue and green. So if we try to translate that, his message may be something about stability, but it also may be something about new or green or different, because he has that little bit of green in it. Let's go forward, and let's look at Hillary Clinton's website. Another candidate. I think Hillary, in this context, is choosing to use, and we can jump forward into her website analysis, there is a huge amount of this blue. There's almost 40% of that light blue. What other websites use this light blue? Facebook, Twitter, right? So this is a social media color. So you're automatically identifying that as a social media color. So in this particular case in her campaign, her primary rival, Bernie Sanders, has a large amount of people in the demographic of 18 to 25 who are supporting him. So she's going after trying to get those particular people. So it's no surprise that she's going after these as colors. So her website colors reflect what she's trying to do. Kind of interesting. So whoever, and obviously I'm using her, she probably didn't design the website at all, but whoever is designing the website for her is aware of what color does. So let's look at John Kasich on the other side, on the Republican side. Okay, again, red, white, and blue. Let's look at his analysis. Right? If we look at his color scheme, blue is at the very top. So while the other websites thus far were leading with blacks, well, I guess Hillary was leading with blue, he's in a similar vote. He's an older candidate trying to associate with younger candidates. He's using that same kind of light blue. It's just interesting to see how this sort of stuff plays out. He's got a little bit of red, though. Right? Thus far, if we go back a couple slides, we don't see a lot of red in the world of Hillary. We're down at 1.2%. Bernie Sanders, we had no red, or just a very, very little bit of red. Okay? As we go forward, we're seeing an increase in the amount of red on a particular site. Right? So there's a little bit more red here. We're up at 6% red. So remember, red is associated with activism or maybe anger or maybe excitement or whatever. So we're seeing that a different political faction is using that color scheme to their advantage. So let's go forward. Another example here would be Ted Cruz's website. And actually I had somebody this morning say, wait a minute, is that Mitt Romney? And the truth is that it's very, very similar to what Mitt Romney's website was. So if we look at this, and we kind of look at it squinted eyes, there's a fair amount of black and gray, right? But there's also a fair amount of red in it, kind of squinted. And so if we look at it, we're way up here in the high percentages in blacks, and then we come down here, basically all of this is neutral, and we only have a very little bit of color, right? 2% red, 1% blue. So it kind of doesn't really fit. Right? To me, it's a little bit odd, and I think whoever's designing that particular website may not be accessing this quick 90-second analysis of who somebody is and what they're trying to come across. So now I couldn't resist, and of course I had to show the last candidate here, in that we've got Trump, Donald Trump as the candidate. Right? We look, what's the primary color we see?
Black.
Right? Black. What else? Red. A lot of red. Right? So he's running on a candidacy that things are wrong, you should get excited, you should try to change things, etc. So we see an uptick in the amount of red that's on this particular page. Right? We're all the way up, this is the highest of any of the websites that I showed you, at almost 9%. So a lot higher red content because that's a message he's trying to get across. So I think this particular grouping of images is a particularly good example, and I'm happy that you guys are taking the class right now because I can use this as a current event example of how web design can shape your impersonation of a particular person. Right? In next semester, I can probably use this next semester, but after that I'll have to abandon these slides and I'll find something else to show. And that is because I want you to see what an impact it has on your 90-second read of somebody. Okay? So let's move forward. We go into, there's lots of websites with lots of information about color. If you do a Google search about color theory, right, there's tons of examples out there that you can use and go through. We're today going to work with the top two websites, Palatine and Colored. Colored was done in the Flickr days where they like to drop vowels, so you have to remember how to spell it. Weird. But those are the two that we're going to work on today that will help you derive a really good color palette. You'll pick a primary color and it'll help you pick those other colors that go with it. And so we'll go through that and you'll see that. But before we do that, I want to show some examples of assignment 104 so that you guys can get a sense for the kinds of things that Charlie Harper did. One of the exercise things that you're going to do in part 1 today is you're actually going to pick a sample Charlie Harper image and you're going to post that image. That's going to be something that you'll base your work on. And so one of the things about Charlie Harper, and I'll go ahead and bring up an image so you can start to see some of his work. One of the things that he did is he flattened shapes into, and it's actually kind of weirdly current since 2013. We're going into the world of flat UI design. This is very flat. Instead of having perspectives, he's flattened out objects. So we take something like this, that is his crane, right? We can distill this into very basic shapes. We have the S that represents the neck right there. That's a basic shape. We have a shape right here that represents the body. Again, two shapes so far. We've got two little triangles there and there. I'm not going to try to draw those. That represent the beak. Again, very simple shapes. And then we've got a few extra curves that represent each of these feathers that are a little bit more loosely defined there. But the point is, it's very flat It's very basic, it's very iconic. And that's what we're going to try to create today. And I've found over time in giving this Charlie Harper assignment, time after time, that it's hard for you guys to necessarily see something and interpret it as a flat object. Right? The natural tendency is to go find a photograph and try to base your work on a photograph, but it's always kind of three-dimensional. And so instead of you going off and just trying to create it from scratch, what I'm asking you to do is find an example Charlie Harper or an image that's in the style of Charlie Harper and adapt it for your own use. So take something that Charlie Harper does and change it. Maybe the birds are different colors. Maybe instead of bluebirds, they're cardinals. Maybe instead of holding a leaf, it's holding a branch. Right? Subtle changes that get the idea across, but you can use that as a basis. Now don't forget, we talked a lot in the photography section about what composition does and what matters in composition. So if we look at an image like this, it has a very strong diagonal composition. And so use that to your advantage and make sure you're using a strong diagonal or a rule of thirds or something like that to help your graphic design. Don't just draw your animal in the middle of a page. Something like this, he does a lot of repetition. So we have the vultures, repeat, repeat, repeat. We get to the end and we flip it, or we mirror that last one, and it's different than the others, and then we have the snake at the bottom. So you want to think about how you can do those repetitions. Another thing that he's known for is things that have movement. Hummingbirds, bird wings, those kinds of items, he draws as these individual little shapes, and those individual little shapes overlap. And instead of being filled in with a particular color, they represent the movement that's happening in a particular scene. They're not three-dimensional wings, right? But those repetition of shapes act as movement. And so he uses that a lot in his designs, and it's certainly something that you can do as well. The other thing that he likes to do is he likes to base his images on a particular pattern. So in this particular case, we have a pattern of circles that repeats itself as it goes across the page, etc., etc. He's chosen to use this circle as the head, but then the body goes where this one circle would have been, but that's deleted. Okay, so he's using the circles as a mode of composition, and then he's working within that context. And so that's something that you can do as well. You can use the same strategy to create your image. Another example here, great use of rule of thirds. Right? The bugs fall in the lower third of the page. So we're using that same compositional technique that we talked about in the photography section again in this assignment. The squirrel, I like this one as an example because it shows you that a three-dimensional object still needs to be abstracted into individual shapes. And instead of doing tonal gradients to represent how something might be three-dimensional, he's just changed and used analogous colors, colors that are very similar. So if we look at this particular example, right, we've got a shape here that represents the leg, right, the rear leg, and we've got a shape here that represents the front leg. Both of those shapes are just slightly darker, analogous colors to the body color, to this color right there. And so it's just using the same similar colors to highlight that this is in front of that. The body is behind the two legs. So it's simple, but very, very effective. An example of kind of his critters and how they come together. And I can start to move through these a little bit faster now because you're getting a sense for what I'm talking about. And of course, when you do your images, you can do a Google search, and there's lots more than the ones that I'm showing you. I think this is another particularly good example because it talks a lot about how he abstracts various planes of depth. So if we look at this, we're looking straight down at a pond. We have some objects that are floating or flying above. And so if I were to look at this, the dragonfly up here is the highest object. It's flying above. As we come down, we get to the leaf, which is, again, really nicely at the rule of thirds. Right? Notice it falls nicely there. But we get the leaf, and that is on the surface of the water. And we can tell that because of these very subtle little concentric rings that go out, as if the leaf is causing ripples in the pond. So that's one layer. So we've got the layer with the dragonfly. Then we've got the layer of the water surface. He also accentuates that right here in the little bug that's standing on the water. It's one of those little water skeeter bugs. I'm not an insect person, so I don't know exactly what kind of bug it is, but he's used the same identifying marks as the circles to represent that this bug is on that plane. Okay? As we go forward, we go down, and we see the lily pads that are just kind of right at that surface, just below the surface. We go below those, we see the fish, the snake. We go further down, we see the fish, and then ultimately we get to the crawdad, or the little lobster, or whatever you want to call it. And so this is a great abstraction of something that's three-dimensional into just planes. And so he's assembled this as a drawing of planes. And I think it's very, very nicely done. Another example here of the dog and the cat. You'll see an example later using the same raccoons in a slightly different manner. The woodpecker and the bug. The ladybugs, again, the repetition, the mirroring is very, very common. So let's look at some student work as you go forward, because I like to show you how some of these adaptations have been made. Right? So this one is, again, very much about the repetition across the backdrop. Same thing, repetition of elements. This is very, very clean. This was from a number of years ago, but very Charlie Harper. Very abstract, simple shapes coming together to make the bird with the branch behind. And again, very strong diagonal composition. Diagonal in one direction, diagonal in the other direction. The panda in context with the backdrop. I really like this one except for the gradients on the fish. I think it would be more successful if it didn't have the gradients. This one is a great adaptation of the back scratching baboons, but one's been adapted to have the knife in the back. Right? So it's subtle, but it's an adaptation of something that Charlie Harper did. Right? Very simple, very clean lines, but a good example. This could definitely be a Charlie Harper. Right? I think this one's pretty good because it shows the life cycle of the termites. Right? The fact that they lose their wings and that sort of thing, and it works nicely as a composition of parts. This was the adaptation of the raccoons that we saw earlier, going after the barbecue, but it's a creative example of kind of how these things can be adapted. Similar animals, different context. Another example here of the flamingo with a few extra kinks in the neck, but again, very graphic. Circle, triangle, two circles together, we get the overall shape. So as much as you can distill these into individual parts or individual shapes, you'll be far more successful in this flattening. I have to show this one because it's one of my favorites, and that is because it's kind of an interaction of various parts. And it's a little bit different than Charlie Harper, but I think it's a good example of how you could adapt it into one of your own compositions. And that is that we have a series of repeating patterns that work across this, but that the animals themselves are made up of very flat objects, but the fact that the trunk reaches up and breaks the field in these two shapes really ties those together. Furthermore, this acts as the ground plane for this other series of elephants. So I think it's a very creative, nicely done adaptation of Charlie Harper's work. It's not an exact copy, but it's a successful adaptation. Okay, so we're going to stop now. Hopefully I didn't go too long. No, we're about on time. And I think, Daniel, you're going to take over, and then we'll come back and we'll go through exercise 116. I'll talk about how do we create the color swatches, and then how do you actually work with them in Photoshop and in Illustrator. Okay, so we'll get back. Thank you guys very much for your feedback. I appreciate it, and hopefully it wasn't too inconvenient to do that. So we're gonna get through this. It's not going to take the entire time. I know some of you have already. You guys like the do the exercise ahead of time strategy, but the purpose today is to make the workload a little bit light so that you can actually spend some time getting your Charlie Harper geometry ready, starting to draw all of your paths, such that you have something pretty well resolved, given that it's due a week from today. So I want you to have that time in class to work on it and to be able to ask me any questions that you might have relating to it. But I do want to go through and talk about color theory and how you might derive a color palette from one of these websites. So I am going to pull up the Digital Tools site because I have tutorials that walk through these various steps. But I'm also going to pull up two websites. The first one is Paladin.com.
And the second one is colored.com. If I spelled it correctly. Yes, I did. Good. Okay, so we're going to start with the Paladin website here. And the Paladin website is a great one for creating color schemes and kind of working through them. As we look at it, we have the first example, which is a monochrome color setup. And what that allows us to do is it allows us to pick a primary color. And so depending on where I swing this little dot, I'll get a primary color that is the background, and then I'll get analogous colors to it, which are the same color but in lighter shades and darker shades. And so those would theoretically work well together as a grouping of colors. And if you wanted a monochromatic color scheme, that would allow you to get one based on one primary color. If you pick a primary color, you can also adjust how light or dark the colors are relating to that primary color. So you can see if I squish these together, my primary color and my colors that go with that primary get very close together. And if I pull it apart, I get almost a black and a white and the reds. So somewhere in the middle zone is usually appropriate. If I move forward here, this is the analogous colors. They call it adjacent colors, but it's essentially the same thing. And that is that it's three colors on the color wheel that are right next to each other. And so as I swing this around, we can see that the colors are always rather similar. Some of them are even to the point where they're almost the same color, right, as we go through. But these three would work nicely as a grouping of colors without anything that would be glaringly different. And so a good example would be for a diagram of a floor plan or something where we had colors that were all in the similar kind of color vein. If we come to the next one here, this is our split complementary or our triad. And that is where we pick a primary color and then we get two colors that go with the primary color. So instead of a straight complementary color, so in this case blue straight across to yellow, we have blue straight across to kind of an orangey green and to a little bit more of a bright yellow, and we get those two options here. And so depending on where I shift this, as it goes more blue, right, I get differences in those colors. So this is generally a good way of creating a nice primary color of a scheme and then some highlighting colors and how those two would come together. This one, which is a tetrad or four colors, allows us to pick a primary color, and it will then pick an analogous color and then the two opposites. So I have a primary and its complement and an analogous color and its complement. And we end up with 20 different shades of colors that go together. The last option would be to kind of customize your own, but I would stick with one of the presets, as I think they will be pretty good. So I'll go ahead and I'll work with the split complementary for right now. And I'll pick a primary color, whatever that color might be. We'll call it purple, or this kind of bluish color for right now. And once I have the set of colors that I like, I'm going to go ahead and go to this button for Tables and Export. And from Tables and Export, I will get my primary color right here, and then I'll get the split complements of it. Now notice below each of these colors there's actually a value that's associated with it. It's a hexadecimal value. I can get this exact same color by typing in that value. So if, for example, I opened up Adobe Illustrator, and I just need a new blank document to do this, and I were to double click on the color value here, at the very bottom, right, there's a little hashtag sign, a pound sign, and I can type in that hex value. So if, for example, I went to that Paladin website and I wanted this kind of chartreusey green, AAAA 39. And so I can come here and I can type in AAAA 39, and I'd get that same color value. So for any of these, I could certainly, and I could draw a shape that was in that particular color. I could write down manually with a pen and pencil these values and be able to recreate the color. So if I had a sketchbook and I knew what colors I was doing, all I would have to do is note what these hexadecimal values were, and I'd get the color values.
Now, it would be a lot more convenient, however, if I just had a file on my flash drive that I could load up into Illustrator or Photoshop and have these colors basically saved for me to use as many times as that I wanted. And so what I can do is I can click on color swatches instead of color list, and when I do that, I can choose to download them as a PNG image. I can choose to download them as a Photoshop file or as a GIMP file. And so I'm going to pick Photoshop. Now, it would be nice if instead of having to download these as a Photoshop file, if I could download them straight into Illustrator. But unfortunately, this particular website won't allow us to do it. But at the same time, this is a good illustration of how we can convert one of these Photoshop files into a Swatch Exchange file. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the ACO or Photoshop example here. And it's going to download it, and it's going to be called My Palette. And in this case, it's 1 because I already did it once today for the morning class, .aco. That means it's a Photoshop file that I can open. So let me go ahead and open up Photoshop. And we'll go to Design Standard CS6, and then we'll open up Photoshop here. OK, so I actually don't need a document in Photoshop to work with this. I just need to go to my Edit menu, my Presets, and then my Preset Manager. And this whole thing, by the way, is written out in Photoshop 1.23. So if you went to the Digital Tools site, Tutorials, Photoshop 1.23, right here, color swatches, it'll walk you through this entire process of creating it. So if you get a little bit lost, it is there. So here I am in my Preset Manager. So once again, that was available under the Edit menu, Presets, Preset Manager. I'm going to switch from my preset type of brushes into my swatches. And I'm going to make a note of what the last swatch is that's in my row. So it's this dark blue color, 2 from the end. And from here, I can go ahead and click on the Load button. And I can navigate to that file that was in my Downloads folder. I'm going to go ahead and move it onto my flash drive. So let me go ahead and copy it. I'll drop it over onto my flash drive. Into today's folder, if I can find it. .116, there we go. And so we'll go ahead and paste it there. Again, it's mypalette1.aco. So we'll jump back into Photoshop, and there it is, mypalette1.aco, and I'll go ahead and click on Load. And so right after that dark blue color, I get my new set of colors that I've loaded in. So I'll click on the first one, which is that purple. That was my primary color. I'll hold down Shift, and I'll click on the last color of my group. And so I have the first 2, and then I have the rest of the 15 colors that it exported for me. Once I have them selected, you would think that you just go to Save Set. But unfortunately, that still only saves a Photoshop file. We want to be able to exchange this file into Illustrator and or into InDesign. And we can do that by creating a swatch exchange. And we're going to do that by clicking on the little gear icon that's right here. And when I do that, I can choose Save Swatches for Exchange. And that will instead allow us to save a .ase. And this file is the one that's cross-compatible, Photoshop, InDesign, Illustrator. So all of them. And so I'll save this as the exercise 116. Actually, we'll just copy this one. And this will be -2. And I'll go ahead and save. So that's then created this group, or this swatch panel, that's cross-compatible into Photoshop and InDesign. So I'll open back up Photoshop, InDesign, and Illustrator. So I'll open back up Illustrator, and I'll click on my swatch window, which I'm in the Essentials workspace right now. If you don't see this little icon, you can reset your Essentials workspace, going back to Reset Essentials, and you'll get the default Essentials workspace. I'll click on my little swatches here, and I'll click on the triangle with the 4 lines to bring up this little flyout menu. I'll go to Open Swatch Library, Other Library, and then navigate to my swatch on my flash drive. So let's see, we're here, here, there. And so this one is going to be the exercise 116 colors 2.ase. And we'll go ahead and click on Open. And that then brings up my swatches. There they all are, and I can choose any one of those. So when I have an object on the screen, I can pick any one of these swatches, and it will then fill that object with one of these particular swatches. So this is something that I can always open. If I was in the world of InDesign, go ahead and open up that one too, if I can find it. All right, so in the world of InDesign, once again, I can go to swatches. Oh, I'm going to have to create a new document first. Hold on, bear with me. There we go. I can click on swatches. Again, I can click on the little flyout menu. I can go to load swatches, and we can navigate to my flash drive into today's folder. And there it is, the 2.ase. And I'll go ahead and open it. And it then loads the colors. It's a little bit different because it loads it right here in my list. Primary colors 1 to 5, secondary colors on each side. But this works exactly the same as it does in Illustrator, where I could pick a region, make sure that this is in the foreground, and then I could pick whatever color I wanted to fill that particular piece with. Now there is a little bit of a risk when you bring it into InDesign, in that InDesign's color space is CMYK. And so the colors as they convert here might not translate exactly the same. And so you just want to be aware, in that case, you may be better off typing in the hex value of those particular colors. Okay, so now that I have my color palette loaded, I'm going to go to the Digital Tools site and go to today's exercise. So we'll go to Spring 2016. And of course, no internet connection. How nice, right? Let's try that again. There we go. 116. And about halfway down on the page, there's a bunch of sample swatch files. The one that I downloaded had 15 colors, so I'll click to download the 15 color version. And we can go ahead and we can open that up in Illustrator. And so you see that I've already created groups or individual little files, and we're going to just apply these swatches to those. And this is a way of confirming that you actually know how to load them in. And so I'll go ahead. This first set is grouped, so I'm going to right-click and ungroup. That was my fault. They were supposed to be ungrouped, and I didn't do it. So that I can select the individuals, and then it's just a matter of applying each color from my swatch panel that I already loaded. There's the first set. Here's the second set. And we can come down to the third set. Oops. And the last one. There we go. And so once I have this loaded up, I can just save it. So I'll go to File, Save for Web, and I'll save an optimized version for it. It's really small by default, so I might bump it up to maybe 500 by 500. There, and then I'll click Save. This will be the featured image of my post, and I will also upload the swatch exchange file that I created, the ASE. Okay? So today you're going to end up making 3 posts. The first one will be a Charlie Harper example image. That's under Part 1. The second one will be a color swatch that's set up from the Paladin website. And the third one will be one from a different website called Colored. And so it's right here. And again, you have to pay attention to the spelling because they dropped some of the vowels in it. And what Colored does is it reverse engineers color schemes from photographs. And it will go through and it'll select a set of colors based on a particular photograph. These are all examples that people have uploaded before. Unfortunately, not all of the examples allow you to export to a Photoshop file. So this is a good example here where all it's giving us are the hex values, which isn't ideal. So instead of that, I'm going to create my own.
And so I'll click on the Create button, and I'm going to start with image DNA. And what this will allow me to do is to pick one of their sample images, so it could be something like this, and to get a color scheme based on that image. And so I can pick one of their presets, or I can choose, here's the random set where I could go through one of their presets, or I could choose to upload my own image. So maybe I'll go to choose image, and maybe I'll pick one of my sample images from earlier in the semester, and it then uploads that particular image and shows me a color scheme based on that particular image. Now, of course, I could choose individual pieces by clicking and creating it, but for right now, this looks decent as a color scheme. I'll go ahead and I'll click on the Save icon, and when I do that, I can choose to download it to Illustrator. I could choose to download it to Photoshop. The Photoshop file will create an ACO, I believe. There it is. So there's the ACO file, and the Illustrator file will create a mycolor.ai, so a straight Illustrator file. Either one is perfectly okay. The difference is, of course, that neither one of these is a swatch exchange. So if you want to use it in all of the programs, you'll have to go with the ACO, open it in Photoshop, and create that ASE format file. If we want to work with just the Illustrator, we can load that in straight away. So I'll go to my flyout menu. I'll go to Open Swatch Library, Other Library, and I need to go to my downloads, which of course it's not going to let me have. Is it in here? There it is, downloads. Thank you. And so it was my color 1, I think. And I'll go ahead and click Open. And there it is. There's the colors that came from my drawing. I want to use those colors in another example file. So I'll go back to the Digital Tools site. Of course, I closed it. Under 116, and this time it's only 5 colors. So I'll come down and I'll download the 5-color sample file. You could, of course, make your own sample file, but I tried to make your life a little bit easier. So you'll click on the first one and go through and attach your colors. 3, 4, and 5. So there were my colors. Once again, I'll do a save for web. Okay, so it's really not too long and intensive. I want you to be familiar with how these work. I want you to upload the JPEG, which basically proves that you know how to load the color swatches and then apply them to an object, plus the color swatch file itself. Then I also want you to upload that Charlie Harper sample image, so you find one that you want to base your work on. And then after that, you have the rest of the time to actually work on your Charlie Harper image. And I would encourage you to stay here and work on it, and then you can ask me questions if you run into those questions, and recognize, of course, that it's due 1 week from today. Some of you will want to use the Live Paint tool today. If you do end up getting to that stage, I'll be happy to walk you through it. We covered it a little bit last class. I will also cover it in a lot more detail next class, so that you guys feel a little bit more comfortable with it. Are there any questions? No? All right.